Weirdos from YouTube. Hello. Now, some of you might be thinking, wait, he has his weapons hat on again. He's not continuing that weapons ban series that he said he had finished. And no, I'm not. Now I'm just talking about a specific weapon. The weapon I am talking about is going to be the scythe. More specifically, what I'm going to call the war scythe, because an actual farming scythe would be worthless in battle. You can check out the video I am leaving in the doobly-doo if you need to know why. Now, what the difference between a war scythe is and what a normal scythe is basically the war scythe is what Lindybeige talks about when he's talking about what we think a scythe looks like compared to what it actually looks like. I.e., it is a straight handle and the blade comes down like this. So handle, blade. Whereas a normal scythe is more of blade tilted and handle is curved in places to make it work well for chopping grass, which is at your ankles. Now, since I personally agree with Lindybeige that the normal scythe is a totally worthless weapon, the question remains, however, would the war scythe be a useful weapon? In order to decide this, we should look at how a war scythe would compare to a similar type of weapon, a spear. Now, you might be wondering, but Grier, a scythe is nothing like a spear. One has a bladey point thing going this way, and the other has a pointy bit going this way. Yes, but all weapons are really just pointy or smashy bits on varying sizes of stick. And both a scythe and a spear are both similarly sized sticks holding on to differently shaped pointy bits. Now, obviously, some spears were substantially longer than what a scythe would be, or war scythe would be, but compared to a spear of similar length, would the scythe be worth the extra chunk of metal that it takes to make it? So, let us first compare spear versus scythe in a one-on-one duel. Now, this is kind of preposterous, because spears were not meant for one-on-one battles. One-on-one battle of spear versus sword, particularly if the sword person has a shield, sword is probably going to win. Because sword has lots of spiky and slicey bits, and a spear has only one spiky bit. You can only stab, 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 stabby, stabby, stab. Spears are generally a formation weapon. You have a lot of people going to stab at once, and they're all in a line, and behind them is another line of people going stab, and maybe even a third line of people going stab, and possibly even a fourth if you have a long enough spear so that they can all reach. So for a dude to get to the point where he can actually hit the first person in front of him, he has to get past 4 different spears first, and each one of them has a chance to stab him. But we're going to ignore that for right now, and just look at spear versus scythe in a one-on-one duel. And we will have no shields of any kind, because both spears and scythes are generally a two-handish type of weapon. Now, what advantages does the spear have? Well, the spear is pretty simple and easy to kill someone with. Take your stick, point it at the enemy, stab. And if that doesn't miss, you pull it back and stab, 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 and stab. One motion to stab, one motion to bring it back. Attack. Just that quick. Whereas a scythe, if you tried to just stab, you would hit the presumably blunt part of the scythe into a dude. So that would just shove him back. Now what if we did something unusual and sharpened that end? I mean, I suppose that could work. Perhaps. But it wouldn't do as much stabbing damage as the spear would, because it would be a much wider area. So it'd probably still just push them back. But pushing someone back can be very useful. And spears cannot push someone back very effectively. It'll just go right through them, or bounce off of them. There's not really much middle ground for that. I mean, you could push them back like that, but you have substantially less reach pushing someone back like that than pushing someone back with a scythe. So, scythes are clearly more complicated to use, but they do have some advantages that spears do not. A scythe can push someone back. Alright, but going with the one-on-one duel thing, that's not really that useful. What is an advantage of the scythe, however, is whereas the spear only has a very small amount of area to parry with, the scythe has a relatively huge area to parry with. Like, considering what we normally think of when we think of a scythe, or just the size of a normal scythe blade thing, you have something longer than my arm to parry with. Now that could be a little bit unwieldy, but you basically just have to go like this to block pretty much anything. Because you just have this wide thing of parrying. Now, how exactly would a scythe do damage? Especially if we're going with the more classic idea for a scythe, which is only the inner blade being sharpened. Has to come around and yank back. Or stab overhand. Or not overhand, but stab by swinging it like this. Which, if you're swinging it, it's a lot more like a Lucerne hammer or Tthe or any of the multiple names for basically the same weapon, which has a smashy bit on one end and a stabby bit on the other. This just doesn't have so much of a smashy bit and a much longer stabby bit. So that could be pretty useful, in my opinion. And the added advantage of being able to very easily hook your opponent and either, especially like around the foot, and either chop off or significantly injure their foot by yanking backwards, or just outright tripping them. Pretty useful. So, yeah, I think it would have some advantages that would make it useful, especially in a one-on-one duel where you have time to both parry and do fancy things like hook someone by the feet and then stab them. But in reality, who's going to be dueling with a scythe? Like, it's a big, honking, huge weapon. You're not going to be carrying it all day long, every day, of every week, of every month, of every year. Like, that's just ridiculous. A scythe is clearly large enough that if it were going to be used as a weapon, it would be used as a battlefield weapon. And if it's going to be used as a battlefield weapon, it's probably going to be fighting in formations. So, how does it compare with a spear, or a Tthe, or a Lucerne hammer, or whatever you want to call that thing? For now on, I'm just going to call it a Tthe. In group combat. Well, once again, it does have the ability to push opponents back. So, if the enemy is charging, and you really just want to keep them at bay. Let's say you have archers behind you who can do a lot of damage as long as they don't get attacked by anything. And you're just trying to hold the opponent at bay. Scythes would be a pretty good thing. Because you can just block, 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 and then if they get past you, parry, 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 and maybe do a few attacks. And it also probably would have substantial penetrating power to go through substantial armor. Now, obviously, it's not going to be very well suited for punching through plate mail, or full plate. But, in all reality, nothing really is. Like, the whole idea of taking a huge greatsword and just slicing through armor, totally ridiculous. You know what they did? They grabbed the blade and stabbed like this and tried to work their way into the cracks in the full plate. That's how you deal with full plate. So if you were trying to do that with a scythe, you'd probably grab near the point with the blade, near the end, with the blade coming down like this, and up here, and try getting in there. And once again, it has this useful hook thing. And if you want to embellish this, you could, like, add a spear tip to the end as well to make it even more effective combat weapon, because then you can just set it against a charge, and unlike a spear, you're not going to skewer someone and then them still run, because humans don't actually die as quickly as they do in the movies. Because he'll get stabbed and then be stuck on the scythe part that doesn't run through him easily. So, yeah, it would probably be a reasonably useful weapon. Maybe it's not worth the extra metal you need to make it. Maybe just no one thought of trying it because it's a peasant's tool. Like, why would you turn that into a weapon? It's kind of like the first person who tried riding on a horse. Why would you do that? That is preposterous. Horses aren't for riding on. Horses are horses. Or the first person who decided to milk anything. Like any of the people who decided to milk any of the things that people now milk these days. Goats, cows. What's going on to that head? So yeah. Probably the reason that no one thought to try making a war scythe back in the medieval times when it would have actually been used, and then we could have seen how it actually fared. No one would have done that because it was entirely ludicrous. So, yeah. That is my opinion on the possibility of war scythes. If you disagree with me, and you've made it through the entire video without storm raging, yeah, that's just a term that I made up, without becoming a giant squid of anger, congratulations, you have earned the right to respond to my arguments in a logical manner in the comment section. And then assuming you do so, I will then respond to your comments on my arguments in a logical manner. And thus, awesome discourse will have occurred, and no idiocy will have happened due to people being too wrapped up in their arguments to actually care about their arguments. So yeah, thank you for watching, and until we meet again, farewell.